Today's episode is brought to you by Condition 1. While stationed in Africa, U.S. Marine Matt DeMaio faced his toughest challenge yet, his diet. Like many Marines, Matt wasn't eating real food on a daily basis. As a result, he had constant fatigue and low energy. What he needed was the perfect performance bar. A well-rounded protein bar made from real food. One packed with a full spectrum of amino acids and protein with complex carbs and healthy fats for sustained energy, muscle fatigue prevention, and more. So Matt teamed up with a nutritionist and Condition 1 was born. From soldiers and gym lovers to those with active lifestyles, C1 can help you reach your fitness goals without the dry, chalky taste. And to honor his military roots, every C1 purchase helps veteran nonprofits. Condition 1 is exclusively offering our listeners 10% off their next online purchase. Head over to gocondition1.com and use the code POD10 to get your protein bar today. Welcome to episode 14 of the Manly Matters podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Turner. So first and foremost, let me go ahead and address what happened last week. I didn't post an episode, if you haven't noticed. So complete transparency, I try to be as honest as possible. The podcast takes a lot. It takes a lot of work between coordinating the guests, getting the guests on, recording, editing, all of that. It takes a lot. And I promised myself when I started this podcast that if it ever became not fun, I would stop doing it. Now, I'm not saying it's become not fun, but I came to a point where I was kind of worn down and I needed a little bit of a break. So I took a week off and we're back good as new. And one more thing before we hop into the episode. If you like this podcast, please go out and give me a rating, give me a review. If you don't like the podcast, give me a rating or review. Follow me on social media, talk to me, let me know what you think. I appreciate any feedback I can get from you guys. I love doing this podcast. I thoroughly enjoy all the guests I get to meet, but I love you listeners as well. And I would love to hear what you think about the podcast or some ideas you might have for the podcast. I'm super accessible. Reach out to me. Let me know. On today's episode, I have psychologist, founder of Essentialized Functional Life Coaching, and overall great guy, Lee Chambers on. Lee has a really awesome story and has overcome all kind of adversity to get to where he's at today. And I think it resonates really well with anyone who's maybe a little discouraged or could use a little boost in life. He offers some really great advice and it was a great time talking to him. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I did. Take it away. All right. So I'm here today with Lee. How you doing, Lee?
I'm great. Thank you, Jesse. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you. So I saw you on this site, right? And you kind of jumped out to me with your story and everything you've been through to get to the point that you're at now. Obviously, you're a coach now, which is kind of in the lane of what I'm doing, right? Or I'm reaching out to people that are kind of doing what you're doing. And but you had a unique story and it definitely piqued my interest. And I wanted to definitely have you on to talk a little bit about it because I think there's a lot of power in these anecdotes, right? There's a lot of power in people's journeys that people can relate to. And I think you definitely have a powerful one. So yeah, let's hop right into it. So first, what do you do?
Yeah, so at the moment, I've got a company that I founded called Essentialized, which has two sections. So firstly, we have a coaching section. So I work individually with entrepreneurs, small business owners, and high-performing employees who are really looking to step to that next level, to look and think, is what I'm doing aligned to who I actually am and what I want to become? And really helping them dig deeper into that purpose, find exactly what the values are and what's the best way to express them as they look to create the life that they want to create. We then start to look a bit more around the health and the energy side of things. So we look to optimize sleep, nutrition, movement, start to make small changes there. So we've got more energy to really push on, to break through those barriers, to cruise past those plateaus and to really start to find more traction to get through the obstacles that really ultimately come as you continue to grow and take on bigger challenges. And then we do work around emotions, feelings, and the limiting beliefs that we take from our childhood that so often hold us back. Start to look at some of the habits that are not serving us in the way that they would be, or that are going to, cause us to lose momentum at some point in the future, and then really start to plan it out and look at ways we can embed these in our lives so that we can stay consistent, we can actually build new habits and forge a different mindset that allows us to take the challenges and approach them to really step into that fear and stretch our comfort zones, and then ultimately support them to see that, you know, in so many ways, you have that accountability, you have someone who's been there, someone who's been on a journey, and people who've walked the same path. You can go out there, find them, and they'll be able to help you, you know, probably walk round some of those potholes that you might fall in, or at least find it easier to climb out when you fall in them.
Right. So, I mean, it sounds like you're doing the whole body approach, you know, the physical, the mind, everything. And that's awesome, because it's really, you know, my channel is centered around manliness and masculinity, but the whole person concept is really what it's about. You know, you can fix the physical, but that's not fixing the behavioral, the emotional, the mental. So I like that you're taking the whole person approach to it and into account, and to really coach people and help people get the lives that they want, or the goals that they want to achieve. But rewinding really quick, so I didn't talk about where you're at, right? If some of my American listeners hear this, they might not, you know, recognize the accent, obviously. So what part of the world are you in right now?
Yeah, so I'm in the north of England. So for our North American audience, I'm looking out towards Ireland and the Atlantic here, just north of Manchester. So around 5 hours drive from London. You know, the UK is tiny in comparison to most states, so it's all relative, isn't it? But yeah, I'm out here in the north of England, and this is where I was born. I've moved around a little bit, but I've ended up still being relatively local to where I was brought up. And for me, that's not a bad thing, because in this world now, I have North American clients. I stay to my office 2 evenings a week so I can work with them. And as well as the coaching, I've also got a workplace wellbeing company. That's, you know, the second branch of Essentialize. And what I actually do with them is take a whole business approach to well-being, looking at organizational culture, purposefulness and values of leadership, and, you know, diversity, inclusion and belonging of their employees, to make sure that everyone in that workplace, you know, they feel like they're on the rails, they feel like they're on the buzz, all traveling in the same direction. And doing that with businesses as well, like a whole business person approach. That's kind of like the overarching theme of my whole life, just looking at everything's interconnected, nothing, it just sits there in isolation. Right. And in so many ways, yeah, that's a big part of me. And yeah, I work across the world now with the power of the internet, and it's a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank God for the internet, because I mean, especially during this pandemic right now, you know, I see a lot of people who have kind of shifted their business models and have had to shift their business models because of all this. But, you know, there's always good you can take out of the bad. But so your story, right? I mentioned that at the very beginning. Take me back to when you decided that, you know, the self-help, or, you know, we'll take it back even further. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah, so I was brought up in the north of England. Both my parents are blue-collar workers. That real hard work ethic, they instilled that in me from a young age. But naturally, my parents weren't around that much. You know, there was times when my mum was working 3 jobs. My dad was working 12 and 14-hour days. But for me, I was always quite curious as a child, quite disruptive. But academically, I did well at school. So, you know, I was getting the grades and not really putting much effort in. And I was always trying to do something different or try something new. Obviously, these are the days before the internet, so I was doing all sorts of crazy things as a kid. And that's just how life was back then. But we always had food on the table. We always had a roof over our heads. So I didn't know any different. It was quite comfortable in that respect. But I managed to forge my way through education and get to university. I was the first one in my whole extended family to go. My parents had really wanted that, so that then I could become an example to my younger brothers and our cousins and other people, that if they wanted to go into education, they could do it too. Right. So that was a real big thing. And when I got there, it was great. You know, I moved out to university, the autonomy and the freedom and the ability to, you know, join societies and do whatever I wanted. It was great at first. And then I started to have a few issues around making the adolescent to adult transition. Kind of looked back and realised that my dad hadn't spent a lot of time with me over the years. He'd been busy working, and when he wasn't working, he was busy doing what he wanted to do because he was always working.
Right.
So I'd never had a deep conversation with my own father, which is crazy thinking about it now, but that's just who he is. And I don't blame him for that, because he didn't have deep conversations with his own father either. So he kind of, it's generational, passes down.
Right.
You father how you've been fathered. And that's why it's so vital today that, modern fathers today actually look at how they are and work on themselves so that they can enable their own sons and daughters to parent in a more positive, proactive and wholehearted way in the future.
Absolutely.
And then I had some mental issues at university. I struggled to express the challenges that I was having and navigate my emotions. I didn't really find that I could dig deep into myself. I didn't have the emotional intelligence or the self-awareness. I looked out to society at other, black young men like me. They were all sports stars and musicians and actors, and that's not me. I didn't see myself. So I felt a bit trapped, so I didn't know where to go. I looked to my dad, I looked to society, I looked in myself. I couldn't get into myself. So things started to spiral out of control because I couldn't speak to anyone. I didn't feel like I could be vulnerable and open up because I was just going to try and be a man and get through it. But what I actually ended up doing was avoiding things. So at first I avoided speaking, then I avoided seeing people, then I avoided going to my lectures at university. And this spiral of avoidance actually ended up with me avoiding everything for a whole 2 weeks where I just stayed in my dorm and didn't do anything. And my parents came and took me home and gave me the space to then actually think and reflect on what had happened and how in the future I'd have to learn how to dig into myself and express that if I was going to navigate through life, because life's full of challenges and it's going to come again. So best be prepared. That kind of then moved me into a world where I went back to university. I built myself back up, graduated, got a job in finance, 2007. Really bad time to get a job in finance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
6 months of grafting away, 6 months of proving myself. Suddenly, my training, funding was taken away. A few weeks later, so was the job. Looked at it and thought, oh man, I need to go and get another job because I ain't got no money.
Right.
Look at the jobs, and it's like, this is the middle of 2008. There is no jobs in finance.
Yeah, that's a bad time to be in finance.
Yeah, so I kind of looked at it and thought, I need to start again. But I thought I need to approach it. Don't just go home and avoid it. Approach it. You've learnt that from your first challenge. When you approach it, you can make things happen. You take ownership. You move forward. So I moved back home to reduce my costs, and I set up a video game business and started a job in local government, knowing that I needed to start to see other industries to try and really craft what I wanted to do, because those 6 months in finance didn't really resonate with me. I'd worked hard. I'd thought I was going to love working in finance, helping people with the money and juggling statistics and figures, because those are two things that I really like. When I was there, I didn't find it that fulfilling, if I'm honest. So I was growing this business, working in local government, and that suddenly went really well. I had a period of 5 years where my whole world and life grew. I bought my first house, and then I met my wife. We had my son, and then me and my wife got married. We cruised around the Caribbean, holidayed in Florida, and then 2014 comes along, and my wife's pregnant with my daughter. And looking out to society, we've got a nice house, we're driving nice cars. I'm running a business, and I've earned so much money now that I don't need to work, even though I'm still going to work, because sometimes when you have that mindset of high performance, you just push it, you continue pushing, you're always pushing something. And I was working in sports and running the business and doing qualifications. It's a crazy time, but I look back now and think that's kind of been the making of me. But then all of a sudden, over the course of 5 days, lost the ability to walk, through illness. My immune system attacked my joints, both my knees, my wrists, my shoulder. And all of a sudden, I went from, a typical man playing team sport, independently doing whatever he wants, when he wants to, doing and going everywhere and being very individualistic about it, being like, if I want to go here, I'm going. That's me. A week later, I'm in a hospital bed. I can't shower. I can't feed myself properly. And all of a sudden, my independence has been stripped away. My mobility and physicality is gone. And in that situation, I was in shock. Because I didn't know, it would happen so quick. Right. My immune system had just gone, bang. Said, not happy. Your joints. My joints were the size of footballs. It was awful.
What was this illness?
So it's a type of autoimmune arthritis. So my immune system had attacked a type of tissue in my joints, and it literally blew them up. So both my knees looked like footballs and were red hot and incredibly painful because that pressure and swelling was pushing my ligaments, my tendons, like my kneecap was like pushed to the side. It wasn't good. It wasn't good at all.
So I tore my patella, was about a year and a half ago in my knee. And I know how absolutely excruciating that was, just taking steps and anytime I would like walk down a flight of stairs, every step felt like a dagger in my knee. I can't imagine what that felt like, what you were going through.
Yeah, and it was painful. And obviously you can imagine at the time when I went into hospital, I was in that much pain. I was on morphine, I was on tramadol, I was on another planet with
all the good
pain
stuff.
Management medication. But after that initial shock wore off, like the negative emotions hit then, and it was like I was in despair. I was frustrated. I was like, you know what? I'm 29. I'm young. I've got my son, got a daughter on the way. Like, I looked after myself all these years, and suddenly everything's gone. Like, I don't know why. And then that kind of passed after a few days, and it became grief. So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to walk again. Like, I'm a man. I'm physical. I'm athletic. Like, I put real value on being able to, stand on a stage with presence, to walk around my community and be me. And all of a sudden, look at me. I can't really move my legs. Like, this is really not good. And into that second week in hospital, I got moved up to another ward with less people on it to try and start the process of recovery after they drained all the fluid off my knees and started to test me for this and that and hundreds of other different things. But I started to realise that this again, it was a bigger challenge than being made redundant. It was a bigger challenge than having mental health breakdown. This was going to define me in so many ways. But the disease that I had, it wasn't going to define me. It was going to be part of me, but it wasn't going to define who I was. And I kind of made that decision. And then I was looking, because this hospital ward I was on, it was on the top floor of the hospital, and the hospital where I was at, it had fields across from it. So I used to look out that window and think, you know what, I'm going to be climbing up those hills. Some point I'm going to be climbing those hills, because I'm not going to be lay here the rest of my life sat in a wheelchair worrying about what I'm going to do. And I fell asleep one afternoon and woke up, and this thought hit me just as I woke up. I realised I'd never been grateful for walking until I lost it.
Yeah.
And that literally just flipped the switch in my mind. Then I was like, all these people coming, your wife, your in-laws, your friends, coming to help you do basic things. Like, you can't even go to the toilet properly on your own. That's pretty embarrassing. Right. That's vulnerability if you've ever smelled it. Yeah. And it's just like, in so many ways, they were coming. They could easily say, yeah, it's fine, Lee, you'll be all right. But no, they were giving their time, their energy to come and help me do all these basic things. It made me realise I've been grateful enough to them, nowhere near grateful enough. And then it just went wider, because I was like, you know what, I've been born and brought up in the UK. I don't know true adversity. Right. I've always had food. I've always had shelter. I'm not an orphan. I've got all this family. I've had free education. I'm now getting free healthcare in some fancy high-tech hospital. There's people out there who go through this. They have nothing. Why should I sit here and and be sad about it. Man, I'm gonna attack this disease. I'm gonna be proactive in my recovery. I'm gonna take ownership. This is mine now. I've got it, but it's me. And how I move through this, I can keep feeling sorry for myself, or I can actually flip that on its head and think, you know what, this pain, this suffering, it's gonna make me grow. It's gonna make me bigger. I can step into this challenge. I don't need to hide and avoid it. This medication is not going to suddenly turn my world around. I can turn my world around. It's me. And that real power of force then drove me on to start in recovery. And then I'm like there, my 18-month-old son, not really speaking yet, but his big eyes looking at me saying like, Daddy, why can't you run round?
Right.
I'm like, looking at him saying, I am, son. I'm going to walk again. Don't you worry. And then I get out of hospital, go into walking rehab. It's hard. Those mornings, agony, having to do all these exercises and drag myself off to rehab every single day, and intensive physio. So I'm doing all this stuff. It's painful. It's hard. My daughter's born, and I'm there just holding her, realising soon she's going to be walking as well, and I'm going to be walking with her. That is my goal. There's nothing bigger that anchors you in than your children. So all of a sudden, your responsibility for you becomes your responsibility for them. And you do more for other people than you do for yourself, especially your children. You want to be that example to show them, Daddy is broken, but he's going to fix himself. Daddy is having a hard time, but he's not got his head in the sand. He's not going to be sat there feeling sorry. He's going to be there trying, striving, pushing those boundaries and limits. Because I know my daughter, she's just been born. She doesn't have any of society's muck on her. She doesn't have any expectations. No one's going to tell her she's not going to walk. And in 9 months, she's going to rise up on her little legs and start trying, fall over 100 times. But she's going to get it. She's not going to give up. And neither have I. I'm not giving up. Not giving up on myself, not giving up on them. That power got me through, got me back in a place where, even though it was challenging, I would do anything. Everything that I did was optimized around recovering. It suddenly didn't matter how I felt. It mattered who I wanted to become. And that's what guided my actions every morning, every day. And after 6 months, I was back on my feet, except I wasn't, because my vertebrae were compacting because I pushed a little bit too far, and my walking gait was all over the place. It wasn't right. So I went back into physio. And there'd have been times when I was younger where that setback would have spiraled me back down again. But I could see I'd made so much progress. Even that back step, I was still further than where I was a month before. And starting to look at it like that and realising that this is not a threat. This is a challenge. This is your opportunity to do something which people might not think you've been able to do. But you have to be crazy enough to believe that you can do something that other people think you can't. Because that's how change happens in the world. Because the world doesn't stand still. We evolve. We keep moving. I was keeping moving pretty slow at first. But after 11 months, I walked a mile unaided, stood there by this light post, and just screamed inside, knowing that if I can do this, oh man, I'm tired right now. I'm about to collapse. But if I can do this, what else can I do? And even more so, like we said before, this was just before my daughter started walking. So I got the competitive advantage right there, because now she's 5 years old. She calls me out. She calls me a hypocrite. She, proves me wrong every day. I don't win anymore, but at least I won one time.
There's so much in that anybody can take away from. And I love that decision that you made, because I feel like so often when adversity hits, and I think that most people don't face nearly the adversity of not being able to walk, losing the ability, for mobilization. But the way I've always looked at it, and I guess my thought process around it is, when some big adversity hits, I think, am I going to let this be a chapter in my book, or am I going to let this be the cover of my book?
And I love that you made that conscious decision, and you looked at that fork in the road, hey, which path am I going to go down? Am I going to let this define me or not? And I think that a lot of what the purpose behind the channel is, and a lot of what my mission is to not redefine manliness or redefine masculinity, because the definition is ultimately up to the individual, but there's societal beliefs around the terminology of it. And my goal is to identify the positive traits that should be tied to it, right? And most of those positive traits come through how you handle adversity and how you handle failure, right? It wasn't failure on your part. It wasn't anything that you did. It was your body. But I guess you can look at it and saying your body failed you, ultimately. But how you handle adversity and failure, right? Because through that is what you're made of. And that's really where you define your values, your core values, and your own character. And I love that you brought it back to the point when you were in college and you weren't made of the same metal, that you were at, you're in your late 20s, early 30s. Because I think that that's also another problem that men have, is they let past failures or past transgressions, whatever they may be, ultimately come back to haunt them when they face new adversity, or they feel that defines them. Hey, I really messed up, 5 years ago. So guess that's just who I am, and it sounds like you even had that thought process of, I'm not going to go back to the way I processed adversity before, and the way I processed maybe an internal failure, something about myself I didn't like, or something about my situation I didn't like. So there's so much to unpack from all of that. But let's talk a little bit about your college years, right? Let's go back to those college years when maybe you didn't handle things the way you would now, or, when you went through this, obviously this big part of your life. So what exactly was, or how were you processing things then, right? So trying to think of exactly how to word this here. So obviously, looking back on that period, it's easy to kind of dissect where your head was at and where your headspace was at. So what do you think it was that just made you break down? Was it the fact that maybe you didn't have the open conversations with your father and your peers? Or do you think maybe it was just you were young and ill-equipped maybe to handle some of the stressors that you were facing?
Yeah, I think it was, looking back now, and, obviously in this conversation as well, it was a massive matrix of things which caused me to be and act that way back then. But if I break it down into a few of the major factors, firstly, open and honest, vulnerable communications. Me and my friends weren't having those communications. We were talking on a surface level, and no one was being open and vulnerable. And society was saying, as a man, you be a man. Mm-hmm. And you don't navigate your emotions, you just be a man. And that kind of prevailing attitude, along with the fact that no one in my network was having those communications, it means that it takes an awful lot of courage to step outside your comfort zone and open up to people. And when you don't have that level of absorbance, and no one in the group has stepped out there and given other people the courage or the space to talk about that, then it almost becomes an insurmountable barrier, because it takes men in a group to have these conversations. One man to start, open up and be vulnerable, not just say, I'm fine, I'm okay, as a standard stock response. I'm just getting on, I'm just doing it, right. I'm getting through it. And when you don't have that and you're struggling, it becomes difficult, because it's easy to do that when you're fine. If someone who is fine says, in the past I was struggling and now I'm fine, that gives the space for people to say, look guys, now I'm struggling, but you've got through it and I can. Is there anything you can help me with? But when those conversations are not there and you're struggling, to have the courage to step outside your comfort zone and broach that conversation with other young men is incredibly difficult. And I just didn't feel courageous, brave, strong enough to have it at that point. Secondly, I didn't feel like I had the tools to navigate my own mind. So, unfortunately, education, there is no class for expressing yourself authentically. There is no class for how to have the negative emotions that you will have because you're a human being, how to express those healthily. There's none of that. And back when I was younger, there wasn't the forums, the websites, the awareness courses. There wasn't any of that. So I just didn't know where to turn. And I didn't have the example. I didn't have the knowledge, the skills, or the tools to start digging deeper and realizing that the answers were inside of me. They've been inside of me all along. But I didn't have the spade, didn't have the map, and I didn't have anything to help and guide me dig that bit deeper, because it's the ability to question yourself and open up that self-awareness. But I've gone through the educational system, and that's all I'd ever done. Found answers to put on the exam paper. Welcome, congratulations, Mr. Chambers, you've got enough marks to go through to the next stage of life. And my life became all about finding a solution. And that solution focus, along with how I am as a human being, I'm very much, solution orientated. Couldn't find an outcome in this. Didn't know where to turn. And that in itself led me to replay that pattern of how can I solve this? How can I solve this? And I just got stuck in that loop.
Right.
Except that loop kept saying, you can't. You're getting 0 on this exam because you don't know what you're doing. Right. You don't know how to broach it. And that starts to almost tell, you got 0%, you're a failure. You got 0%, you're a failure. And that, together with the ability not to have the open and honest conversations, and just not ever having, through my younger life, challenges that push me far enough outside my comfort zone. Because my parents, they tried to make my, childhood as comfortable as possible, like many late millennial parents did. That was just a trend back then. Make your children as comfortable as possible.
Right.
And unfortunately, that doesn't prepare your children to fall into the failures of life. I saw failure as terrible. It was one of the worst things that could happen to you. And obviously now, having developed 15, 20 years down the line, I understand that failure is how we grow. Failure is amazing experimental data for the future. Back then, if I failed the test, I'd feel incredibly down about it, right, because I honestly defined everything that happened in my life as me. So, messed up a test, failed. Me failed. Right. And it's like, I choked on stage in front of 300 students, and that was right in the middle of when I was struggling. And that literally reduced how I felt. Like, I'm 6 foot tall. I suddenly felt 3 foot tall.
Right.
And I was walking around like I was 3 foot tall. And that, all those things together led me to feel like a failure, feel like I couldn't do anything about it, got stuck in a spiral going downwards. I started to not look after myself. Everything started to fall apart because I just felt like I was failing and there was no way I could solve it. And I couldn't open up to people because I wasn't strong or brave enough. I didn't have the courage to seek help, and I didn't really know where to go. And that just led me to avoid everything. Avoid the conversations, avoid my friends, avoid university, avoid societies, and just step away from everything. Because when you don't know what to do and you feel like you're failing, you start to turn away and run.
Right.
It's fight or flight time, and you're scared and you don't feel like your fists are going to fight anything. So you run.
Right.
And unfortunately, so many young men been in that position. Except for me, I run. Some keep standing there, taking more and more negative emotion until it becomes too much. That needs to change.
Right.
That's one of society's biggest problems, because when you don't run, you can't move forward. They don't move back. They fill up like a pan of boiling water, because all the negative emotions, they get suppressed, they get trapped. At some point, that pan is full. water starts to come out and scold you day after day after day. That's what drives so many young men to a place where they don't feel like they can take anything else, and they can't talk to anyone. And it's incredibly frustrating, incredibly sad. And if anything, for me, it become a massive part of what I do today, because I was scared and ran. At least I'm here now to tell that tale.
Yeah, you're 100% right on the people that kind of freeze there in time, and through that adversity, because you see it. I mean, if you look, I'm not completely familiar with what the rates are in the UK, but in America, the rates of male suicide are 79% is male. And, talking to the psychologist I talked to last week, she said that part of that is not that it's skewed, but part of that is because males choose more lethal means, typically. But that in and of itself says something, that women more often than not choose pills. And there's always that thought in the back of your head, well, I might throw them up, or I might be resuscitated, whatever it may be. There's no coming back from, a gunshot wound, unfortunately. So I think that being said, that's why the male suicide rate is as high as it is. And that's why, the rates of depression and anxiety that go undiagnosed in males or go untreated is how it is. And it's that vicious cycle, right? We're told not to process our emotions. And I wanted to hop back to that point of you talking about not really being able to have those conversations, because I think that's a very common thread that I see with most men. And I see sometimes where there are these people that you bond with, and, you're like, okay, this is my bro, this is, whatever, but you can't ever get past surface level conversations. And you don't ever get a more, and I know the word intimate sounds, scary, but that, a deep dive into a relationship with somebody when everything is surface level. And when you don't feel like either A, I can help this person if they're struggling, or B, can they help me if I'm struggling? And then you just kind of have a drinking buddy, you don't really have a true friendship. And I think that part of that comes from that point of childhood. And I've talked about this, I feel like on every episode, is we're told not to process our emotions, right? Masculinity does not equal femininity. And, crying emotions equal femininity. Femininity equals weakness. Weakness does not equal masculinity. That's the equation that we're taught. And it's this vicious cycle, right? That we pile on more, and we are our worst enemies. Ultimately, our brains are our worst enemies. And they will do exactly like you said. They will attach failure, and they'll attach shortcomings to you, not to an event, not to a particular trial or tribulation that you're going through, but you failed, so you're a failure. I know I'm as bad as anybody about having those thoughts, shoot, in full transparency for all of my listeners, one of the things I've had to do is take a step back from checking the numbers on this podcast, right? I get so caught up, and I started this podcast with what I feel like is the right intentions of trying to help. But when you get caught up in that numbers game, how many listens do I have today? Or how many followers do I have on this site? How many reviews do I have? And when maybe you don't see the numbers that you think you're going to see, or you don't, you start attaching that to yourself. Well, what's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough? And in all reality, there's a multitude of reasons that these things are happening. And I think that men, I don't want to say just men, I think that people as a whole do that. But the real reason why it's such an issue within men is we're not taught to open up to other men who will say, nah, bro, you're not a failure. Just right here, you didn't, you could have done X, Y, Z, and it would have succeeded. It has nothing to do with who you are. So, I think that's a very common story you'll hear from men, is that not being able to communicate and taking and internalizing a failure to mean you're a failure. So, how did you get through that? Right. So you said that your parents came and picked you up, and brought you back home, and you stayed with them for a while. So how were you able to kind of break through that threshold or get to the point where you were able to become a functioning person again?
Yeah, so kind of being taken home, it took me out of that environment, took the expectation off me to go to the lectures, to go and see my friends, to be out there, and actually give me the headspace to reflect, start to look at what actually happened. And I realised that in so many ways, this wasn't me failing. This was me being challenged. And again, when you fail, you block everything. So because you feel like a failure, no feedback can help develop you, can help you get out of the hole, because you put a massive shield, a massive mask up, try and protect yourself from the world, because you're a failure now, and everything in the world is going to expose you and make you feel vulnerable. And it's like all of a sudden you're a failure, you've got no clothes on, and you're running around trying to hide behind something. And in that position, you can't. You're so busy focusing on protecting yourself that you don't see all the amazing things happening in the world around you, and you don't stop and analyze the situation and actually look at things practically, because you're so busy trying to, put your shield back on. And when you actually stop and you're taken out of that situation, it gives you some space. Suddenly, in that gap, I sat there and I had time to reflect, because all of a sudden I didn't have any expectations on me. I was about as exposed as you could get. I'd failed completely and been taken home, but being taken home removed all the expectation. And with that removal of expectation became a decrease in pressure. And the decrease in pressure then allowed me to sit there and think, have some time to actually go into my own world without worrying, without feeling like a failure, but actually start to look at what had happened. And that space actually allowed me to realise that when I choked on the presentation, not because I was a failure, because I was overconfident and hadn't prepared. And that the challenges I was having at university, because I wasn't taking it as seriously as I should have. And I was just utilising the fact that I'd been particularly lazy in the past and still got the grades, and not realised that actually the harder education gets, the more effort you actually need to put in.
Yeah.
And I started to see that the things that I was struggling with, that was because I was just repeating patterns from the past. Repeating patterns that had been fine in childhood. I was an adult, had to start to look at those patterns and think, are they working for me? And obviously not, because I got myself into a difficult position. And I started to look and realise that I need to grow. I can stand here, but the problem is I'm like a fully grown child. I've not had the challenge to grow as a child because my parents have made it comfortable. But if I stay comfortable, I could be 50 and I could still be like a 10-year-old.
Right.
Or I need to go out into the world. I need to go back to university and prove to myself that I can grow, that I can do it differently. I'm not a failure. And that point, it took a week or two to get from my whole life's gone to actually I'm not dead. I've got a whole lot of life to live. Hopefully I'm like 20 now. Hopefully I've got another 80 years to make a difference.
Right.
Let's go and attack life. Let's actually go and make a difference. And really, I got curious. I found that inner child curiosity to go and find out who I could become. Who was I, the man? I wasn't going to find out sitting there thinking about it. I wasn't going to get there by worrying and trying to run away from everything that come my way. I realised if I'm going to become the man that I am, I need to learn how to express my emotions. I need to learn to dig into myself. And to chisel the character that I will become, I need to go out there and face those harsh winds, walk out into that winter and be resilient. Find the challenge and get through it, because that's the only way I'm going to realise my potential and realise who I actually am. Because I can't sit here and read a book suddenly magically appear, and I can't think my way to clarity. I've got to go out there. I've got to finish university. I've got to go out into the world of work as an adult and gradually chisel my character until I find out who I am. Otherwise, I can spend my whole life not moving anywhere. And I started to realize the only time I'm going to grow when I'm uncomfortable.
Right.
Not going to be when I'm comfortable, because I'm not stepping outside of that comfort zone. And I realized it's very difficult to take a massive step outside. Start sticking your toe out day after day after day. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Right.
And the process of starting that helped me to get back to university, actually take it seriously and start growing and start doing things. And yeah, it took a few years for me to get that inner confidence burning again. But it happened because I intentionally went out there with the mission to find out who I was. Not as a man, but as me.
Right. And when I talk about the term manly, right, there are these, and I chose that word particularly for the title for a reason, because there's so much murkiness around. Right. You don't really know what it means. Right. And if I had to sum it up in 2 words, what I would say true manliness or true healthy masculinity is honor and courage. That's it, right? And those are very vague, antiquated terms. And, what does honor really mean? I don't know that anybody knows in the modern times. But courage is a very important one, because so many times people mischaracterize courage as, okay, well, I'm just not afraid, right? Courage means I'm not afraid to go do things. And that is the exact polar opposite of what courage is. Courage is, hey, I'm, for the lack of a better term, I'm scared as shit, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that I can't beat that into people enough, that courage doesn't mean you have to not be afraid. Courage doesn't mean that you have to just be, okay, nothing scares me, I'm going to keep pushing forward. Courage means, man, this is hard. This is scary. This is daunting. I don't know how I'm going to complete this. I don't know how I'm going to start this, whatever it is, but it's starting, it's completing, it's pressing through that fear. And it sounds like that was that switch that clicked with you, is ultimately you gained some courage back, and it's not at all a knock to say that someone's afraid and they don't have courage. It just means that they don't know how to move forward, right? It means, hey, I'm scared right now. I am panicked. I have anxiety, whatever it is, and I don't know where to go from here. And courage is kind of that switch that flips that says, okay, here's where we go from here. And it's kind of that mentality. And sometimes it's inherent. Some people are just born with more levels of courage, I guess you'll say, but more often than not, it is nurture versus nature. It's something that you have to learn. And I think that part of that is, I know we keep cycling back to this, but I think part of that is with candid conversations with people who have been through things similar, that they can give you the courage. I don't want to say they can give you the courage, but they can boost your courage level, right? They can say, hey, I did it. I went through the same thing as you, or I'm going through something similar as you, or I'm going through something more difficult than you. And I came out on the other end. It's fine. You're going to be fine. But until we have that vulnerability, and ironically enough, the courage to talk to people, because that's what it is. Men talking to men about emotions, we're scared. People may dice it however they want to say it, but dudes are just scared to open up to other guys. And they're scared to show that level of vulnerability, but doing it anyway is courage, right? So it takes the courage of opening up to men to get some of that feedback to give you the courage to press on. It's just this crazy cycle that we can't break, is what it feels like.
Yeah, we've got to go into there and just unpack courage for a few minutes, because it's absolutely vital. It is the one pivotal thing. So the actual word itself means to tell one's mind by telling one's heart.
Wow.
And that's what courage actually is. So in modern society, you ask someone, what does courage mean? They think it's, the firefighter going saving someone at the burning building, the superhero.
Right.
Courage is very personal. Courage is your version of stepping that little toe outside of the comfort zone. Mm-hmm. That's your courage. And what having open conversations with other men does is encourage them to have the conversations back, to say, and the word is simple. You encourage by empowering others by having those conversations. If you can have that conversation, not only will it be protective for you when you're having a challenge, but it opens up the floor for any other man to say, I'm not fine, I'm not okay. Come on, guys. Like, I need to talk and properly talk. And it's absolutely massive, because it only takes one man in a group to set that flag in the sand. All of a sudden, every other man can step forward and say, it's not all right, I wasn't all right, you know. And at that point, those conversations can go deep. Just needs one man to grab that spade and dig a big scoop in the middle, and then everyone can pick up their spade and dig together. And really, as men, we want to be in teams. We want to be there for each other.
We're pack animals.
Yeah, we're pack animals. And at the end of the day, vulnerability is everywhere. We don't see it. But when your military grade sticks his head out of that tank, out of that parapet, he's about as vulnerable as he's going to get. That man in the middle of the sporting field, that football lands in his hands, he's about as vulnerable as he's going to get hit by another 10 guys. Right. And in reality, the most manly man is vulnerable all the time. That picture of that hero, he's vulnerable 90% of the time. So you embrace that, let it out. And in fact, vulnerability is beautiful, because what it does is it allows men to come together arm in arm and be less vulnerable in life to all the challenges that we actually face in modern society, when, unfortunately, due to the way the world now works, masculinity is considered toxic, and lots of other iterations of words which unfortunately degrade men who continually hear it, even if they don't portray any of the traits that are toxic.
Absolutely.
And the reality is that the world that we're in it's a bit mixed up and shaken up in a lot of different ways, and the wording that's used bleeds into people's consciousness and makes them feel a certain way. If someone tells you you're toxic, tell me, are you going to step up and, you know, not be poisonous because you've been told?
Right.
Poison.
Yeah, and it gives an excuse. You know, I've said that before, is that when you say that something is inherently bad, if I can harken back to my last, at the time of this recording, my last podcast was, she had said that toxic masculinity, the term in the psychological sense, has weight. But the problem is that it has become so ubiquitous that everyone is using it, and they're misusing it to say that men are born bad. Men are born with these toxic traits that is just inherently them. And what it does is it validates bad behavior. Is at some point, there's going to be men who said, well, I'm toxic, so what do you expect? You know, yeah, I went out and you know, sexually assaulted somebody. Well, I was born toxic. You know, what can I do? Oh, well. So I hate that it has stigmatized men from birth to say that you are automatically toxic. Now, are there traits historically that have been tied to masculinity that are toxic? Yes. I believe things like not being able to open up, not showing vulnerability, not being able to process your emotions in a healthy way is toxic, but it is not inherently in us. It is something that is taught to us, and that's a cycle that can be broken. But one thing too is I wanted to talk back when you were talking about the vulnerability is I've had this conversation before, that for me, when I think about a group of men opening up to each other and being vulnerable and letting each other know their own weaknesses and their own, hey, this is something I'm struggling with. This is something that I do struggle with. This is a weakness in me. I like to think of it in terms of, because so many times you'll see these guys who have a misconception about masculinity, that we have to be just stoic and can't talk, So the way I typically try to relay that is, okay, think of a group of warriors, right? Think of Spartans, let's say, and they're all shoulder to shoulder, and you don't know, the person next to you, you know their name, and you know what they're good at, but you don't know what they're bad at, right? They have made it a point to not let you know their weakness. That is dangerous, because now you don't know where you need to be to help pick them up to ensure that they don't break through the line. Right. And so it's the same person to the left of you. If you know the person to the right of you, hey, he's great with a bow and arrow, but he is not good with a sword. Okay, now I know that. And if somebody gets close to him, I need to get in front of him to help protect him because he's vulnerable. Right. Or the person next to you is the opposite. Hey, he's good with a sword, but he's not great at distance. Okay, we know we need to send his ass to the front and not keep him back here because he's not going to help. It's the same concept. Is the people that you have around you, the group of men or group of people, we'll say men, women, whoever, that you have around you, when you don't know their vulnerabilities, you don't know when to be there to pick them up, and you don't know how to be there to help them, or not even necessarily help them, just to be there for them, be that shoulder. And if all of us men are that stoic and that, hey, I'm going to process through this on my own and I'm going to die with my own baggage, you're not allowing the people around you to be there, to be that guy with the sword who knows that you're not good at archery, or the guy with the sword who knows that you're only good at archery, right? So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. I try to relay everything in metaphors that people can wrap their head around, and that's the best one I can think of is why it just makes sense for us to be more open and show vulnerability, let those people know so they can be there to dig us out of those holes.
Oh yeah, and in so many ways, it works in business, it works in sport. Teams are made up of people who have strengths and weaknesses, and you don't have everyone with all the same strengths, because when something that challenges the opposite of those strengths, you're going to find that you have everyone who's good at this, but no one who's good at that.
Right.
And therefore, those teams are ineffective. Therefore, your group is ineffective if you're not able to amplify the fact that you all have weaknesses, probably quite different. But that puts us in a beautiful position to help people where we're a bit stronger and they're a bit weaker. And that pulls us up as a group. And that's incredibly powerful when we're looking at creating a group of people who are there for each other, because you then know. And so often, what it actually takes is the bravery for you to have that conversation. You know your friend, you see him, every week, and this week, you can see it in his face, stressed, something's going on. This is the point where you've got to have the bravery to take that step, put your arm around him and say, mate, see you're not right, talk to me about it. It's such a small, you just need to ask him the one question, how are you? And so many men, all they're pained, will just tell you, oh, I'm fine. And that's when you ask the question, are you really fine? And what you'll find is people who you've bonded with, they will tell you they're fine the first time. You ask them truly, with care, are you really fine? They'll tell you. You only have to ask that second question. And when we're talking about deep conversations, we're only talking 2 questions down more often than not. And that second question is incredibly powerful. Not so often is the difference between someone close to you breaking down, or someone close to you opening up.
Right. And I think
finding themselves.
And I think that also is with that conversation, with true vulnerability, is I've noticed that in some of my friendships as well, is you ask that, right? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Are you sure? You really don't seem fine. Well, this is going on, right? And I'm encouraging people to even, if possible, dive even deeper than that, right? Because it's one thing to say, hey, well, this is going on. Me and the wife are fighting, and it's bumming me out. Okay, okay, cool. But why? Right? Well, because this and that, and it's in my job, my day job.
Yep.
One of the processes we do is called the 5 whys. And any process, you should be able to ask why 5 times, right? Or I say 5 times. Some of them you can ask 10 times. And I try to do that with friends. Okay, me and the wife are fighting and it's bumming me out. Okay, well, why? Well, because, when we're fighting this and that. Okay, well, why? And typically, if you keep asking, you keep probing, you'll get to, well, because I'm scared. I'm scared. Yep. And that's the kind of level of vulnerability that more often than not we don't get to, is that, well, I'm genuinely afraid of losing my wife, or I'm genuinely afraid that I'm not good enough, or whatever it is. And it's tough, but like you said, and I love how you said it takes you being that first one to plant the flag, because if you haven't cultivated that culture of vulnerability, it's going to be tough to draw it out of somebody the first time. When planting the flag means you have to be the first one to be vulnerable. You have to be the first one to say, screw it, guys. I am genuinely afraid that I'm not a good enough father, or, whatever it is. And then you may not hear anything else, but maybe that next time when you say, yeah, but why are you upset about this? Then maybe you'll actually get that, hey, well, and ultimately it all does revolve around fear. Most of it, almost all adversity comes from fear. Well, I'm scared. I'm scared of this. But I don't mean to hog up all the airspace, but just kind of wanted to piggyback off that, because I do think this is such an important topic that these conversations get us somewhere. And I did not see this podcast go in this entire time about, having open, candid conversations, but it really is so important. But I want to talk a little bit about your business now, right? So you talk a little bit about what you do, but when you're coaching some of these people, or you're helping these people through these certain situations, what do you see, maybe particularly in men, are some of the issues? Is it more or less what we've been talking about, or is there some other common ones?
Yeah, so quite often it's, so say we look at goals, and men quite often have a defined goal. I want to be this, I want to do that. And when you dig deeper into the why, you then start to peel the onion. And I've gone 16 whys with a client to finally find out why he wanted what he wanted originally.
Right.
And what it comes down to is, once you've peeled the onion, it comes down to a feeling or an emotion.
Right.
That is the root of the why. And for him, it all come down to external validation.
Mm-hmm.
That simple. And it took a lot of peeling to get down there. But then you start to see that actually so often men are searching for something somewhere, and they don't realize that that's actually inside.
Right.
But it's easy to be blind to your own insides and your own gifts and your own skills, because we're not taught to delve into ourselves. We're not taught to find out who we are. So many of us are men by societal design. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to not build on that, to just walk around as man, as a man. And really, the beauty of masculinity is masculinity is an expression of you as a man. And you create your own masculinity. And it ultimately doesn't define you, because you define as who you are. Right. But it's a part of you. And you should be proud of that. And we should be proud of that. And ultimately, the truth is that the way the world is, especially in the world that we live in today, that women have less opportunities than men do. That statistically is true. And therefore, in some ways, things should become fairer. But to push for equality, given that every individual on this planet is different, very difficult concept, because things can't be equal when everyone's different. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to have, the equality of opportunity, the equality of chance, right? Not equality so everyone's the same,
right?
Because we're all unique. And there's a massive distinction in that as we look to try and push forward to a society where there is more opportunities for people who haven't had opportunities before. But that doesn't mean that masculinity is toxic, because let's be honest, anything in excess is toxic.
Absolutely.
And that includes the water you drink, the air you breathe, and the atoms that we're made of.
Yeah.
And it's about realizing that you harness your own authentic expression. Don't use society's labels to justify your actions, because you are the owner of your own destiny, the owner of what you do, what you did yesterday, what you do tomorrow, and what you're doing right now in the present. And when you as a man dig that bit deeper, find out who you are, enable others to do the same thing, and to express themselves exactly as they are in the world that we live in, that's when you become a man. Because
Absolutely.
man opens the door for all men to express themselves. And that is a massive part of what we do, because being a man, you're not just a man. You're a father, you're a son, likely to be a husband, you're a member of society, a worker, player. Whatever you do in your world, being a man doesn't define you. You define you.
Absolutely. And it's so powerful. And I love that you mentioned, equality of opportunity, because obviously that's a politically charged statement, unfortunately, because that's ultimately what everybody should be striving towards, is equality of opportunity. Some people are better at some things than others, period. Just how it is. Equality of outcome hampers some and boosts others, right? There's negatives of that. And, one other thing I wanted to mention when you were talking about was you are an individual. You are your identity. I am a big advocate for, I guess it's more of the anthropological view, but we're pack animals, and we talked about that before. Is we need our pack, and we need our groups to operate in our tribes. And tribalism is such a charged word because of the different connotations that come along with it. And I want people to understand that tribalism is another thing. It's like feminism. Tribalism in its purest form is absolutely healthy. When you operate within your tribe and you have your tribe, you build each other up and you're able to influence each other positively and do things like that, it is good. Groupthink, however, is not healthy. Okay, if you are a part of a tribe who is telling you your identity is directly tied to this, and you have to think exactly like us, and you have to be exactly like us, run, turn around and run. Be afraid of that one. All right, there's no need for courage in that one. Turn around and run, because that is how you get your identity tied to things.
Yeah, and I think it's in so many ways. If you look at the psychology of anything that's considered, unpleasurable, like displeasing, what happens is, if it's present, people have context to do it, even though it goes against the values, against the morals. And what you want is awareness, and people then take the step to pass it through their own lenses of judgment and realize that that's not really how I want to represent. But you force people together, and they will do things in a negative way together, and that becomes the context that they then live. And that can easily spread. In fact, it's more easily spread when people's, voices are limited, and boundaries are placed on people, because human beings like the idea that we have the autonomy to move, to speak, to think, to breathe. Take that away from people, and they will become more entrenched in the way that they are, and they won't be able to evolve and move forward, because as a human race, that is how we've got to where we are today. The agility and the dynamism to continue evolving through challenge after challenge after challenge. And adversity doesn't discriminate. Male, female, everyone has these challenges in their life, and society has some significant challenges to navigate. And yet, if we become more aware, accept the reality, and start to work on that together, we'll make a better place for every human being to live in the future.
Absolutely. And people, it cracks me up, that we live, because you hear the term cancel culture, and we kind of live in the world where now, a misstep can get you screwed. And it blows my mind, because at some point, everything we believe in as a society was controversial. At some point, every single thing that we do, how we operate, belief systems, the world being round was controversial at some point. And if this cancel culture, this idea that you think differently than I do, so you don't have a voice, if that was around back during the flat earth, which I guess we still have some flat earthers today, but that's a whole other topic. But, back in the true world flat earth belief, then who knows how long it would have taken for us to realize that the world was round. I don't know. I can't, and this is getting off another tangent, but I can't understand the idea of not letting someone speak because their ideas are different than you, or wanting to completely stifle someone's speech because it disagrees with you. I don't know, but that's my rant.
You know what, Jesse? In the biggest way possible, everything that we see today that's been created, at one point some crazy person suggested that, and was ridiculed and was mocked. Planes? Ha! Light bulbs?
Right.
Ha! Food in a box? Oh, that's imitation food. What's that? And all these things that now exist in our culture. At one point, someone suggested it and was laughed. The idea of a phone sound traveling across up to the other side of the world, right, from some wires and some waves.
No way.
Are you insane?
Right.
I can't see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to dive too much in that tangent, because that could be a whole episode in and of itself. But anyway, let's talk about your business a little bit, right? So we've already been on the horn here for like an hour and 10 minutes. So, so you said you're in Northern Ireland, right? I mean, not Northern Ireland, Northern UK.
Yes.
Yeah. So what exactly, you said you offer services online and things like that. So for someone who says, hey, maybe I like what this guy's made of, I'd like to reach out. What kind of things can you offer for people, or what can you do to help people get through difficult times?
Yeah, so I offer online sessions across Zoom, and that's incredibly powerful. Naturally, we go into those initial exploratory sessions trying to find out exactly what you're looking to get from it. For some people, it's more career orientated. For some people, it's more kind of finding out the direction in their own life. For some people, they've got something particular that they want to address, something from the past they want to unpack. And I'm a psychologist by trade as well, so that helps me to navigate both the future and some elements of the past. And I know where the boundaries lie because I'm trauma informed, and that really helps me have a very clear definition of who I can help. And again, on that initial call, if people reach out to me, we can see if we're a fit, because in the world of coaching and development, I can't help everyone, and you might not be my ideal client. Really important that when you're having these open, honest conversations, you resonate with each other. You wouldn't go and have these open and honest conversations with a stranger on the street, because those relationships need to be built. And yet, again, if we resonate, I could be the perfect coach for someone who's currently struggling. And there's a lot of people having challenges out there at the minute. And again, when it comes to with the business stuff, I do a lot of stuff with small to medium-sized companies, because they're in a place where they can start to move the culture to be more positive, to be more conscious and purposeful, more value driven, so that their employees feel that they're traveling in a direction that's, changing the world. I'm all about getting companies laser focused, sharp like an arrow, knowing exactly what change they're going to bring to the world as a company, because companies are the ones currently changing the world in the biggest way. And as we look forward in the future, at the moment, of the 200 richest entities, over 150 are companies. Not countries who are going to be changing the world, it's companies. And I'm doing my part to go into companies and ensuring that the culture is looking not just at paying the investors some money, but actually looking at how they're going to impact society, customers and the clients, the partners who they work with, the investors still, because money is like blood for a business. Mm-hmm. can't make an impact and you're not sustainable, you're not making money and paying back the people that you are. And also employees, because ultimately they're the face of your business, they drive it, they operate all the processes. You've got to get them feeling like they belong, like their values, like they're appreciated, and that they have the autonomy to grow. And my work, I know I've made significant difference to a number of companies within the UK, and now starting to look to branch that out to other North American companies as I've started to expand my practice. So many ways, if you reach out, I will have that conversation with you. The programs that I create are bespoke and personalised, because just like this chat, there is no one-size-fits-all approach for masculinity for a man. You are your man, your identity, your person, just like your business is your business. And that is the kind of work that I do. I assess, I consider your pain points, your industry struggles, your challenges, and then we look to plan future where we're going to take on those challenges, overcome them, break through the obstacles, dissolve the barriers, and make the future closer to your business's or personal potential. And that's where you want to be at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And as someone who's worked for a toxic organization, I can tell you how ineffective the organization can be. So I know that's needed. And, when you're talking about the employees, one of the quotes that popped in my head, I'm pretty sure it was Richard Branson that said it. But he said the old adage of the customer comes first is absolute bullshit. He said your employees come first. He's like, because if you don't have happy employees, you don't have employees that feel empowered or feel ownership to the mission, then you won't have any customers. So, if you have a small business out there, reach out to Lee. It sounds like he's doing exactly what's needed for, small companies and also individuals. And I think it's really important. I've talked to a lot of coaches and I think that everything you guys are doing, and it's so funny, the similarities and the slight differences, and the slight differences are what makes someone better for you than others. So, just like you said, that Zoom conversation will let you know, but you've got my vote of approval. I think you'd be a great coach. But any last, imparting words on my listeners, advice, words of wisdom, anything like that?
Yeah, so it's definitely be the man to step in and have that conversation. Don't just sit on the surface. Don't sit in the shallows. Go deep. Go deeper and just do that. And when you fail, it's not you. Think about it. This is life. One big experiment. Go back to school. Put your lab coat on. You're in your science lesson. You're trying to get these chemicals to turn into something else. You put the flame to them and it all goes wrong. That's going to happen so many times in life. But that is what life is about. And all of a sudden you look at it and you think, right, too many of this chemical, not enough of this, too much heat. That's what happens every time you hit a challenge and fall and fail, because you haven't actually failed, just experimented. It didn't go right. And in those failures, there's so much that you can take, but it's not you who failed. It's the process, it's the situation, it's the environment. Take that forward. Those are lessons that can be used to create an amazing future. Just think the decisions you make today will become your future. So take ownership of those. It's you, your life, your mission, your purpose. Go and live it.
Absolutely. And it's your manliness, whatever that means to you. Don't let anybody else define it. So, Lee, where can we find you on social media, your website, anything like that? I'm going to put the links in the description as well, but go ahead and shout it out.
Yeah, so I'm on essentialize.co.uk. Find that in the show notes. My socials are connected to that, and my socials are Essentialize Coach. Awesome.
And like I said, links will be in the description. Lee, thank you so much for coming on and talking. It was a great conversation. I think your story is so powerful, and I hope it resonates with my listeners. I know it'll resonate with my listeners, and I hope they can take something from it. And, I hope to have you on the channel again soon, because obviously there were so many topics we had to cut off that we could have, pigeonholed ourselves into. So maybe we can do this again and dive into some of those conversations.
Oh, definitely open to a part 2.
And there you go. I'm going to thank Lee one more time for coming on. He's always a pleasure to talk to, and I hope to have him back on the podcast soon. Make sure you check out the episode description to find out how to get in touch with Lee. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you look up the podcast on social media. On Facebook and Instagram, it's at Manly Matters Media, and on Twitter, it's at Manly_Matters, and both Manly and Matters are capitalized. Make sure you tune in to next week's episode because I have another great guest. Thanks for giving me a little bit of your time. Until next time, adios.